There are things you know in your bones before your brain catches up. I knew something was wrong the moment my mother-in-law smiled at me across the dinner table that night, not the warm, practiced smile she usually wore for company, but something tighter, something that didn't reach her eyes at all. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was 8 weeks pregnant, exhausted, and my hormones were turning every shadow into a threat. I picked up my fork and ate my salmon and told myself to stop being so sensitive. That was the last meal I ever ate in her house. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without understanding what I was walking into when I married into that family. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he was, even if he stopped acting like one, came from old money. Not flashy, Instagram yacht kind of money, the quiet kind. The kind that lives in trust documents and estate lawyers' offices and gets passed down through conditions and clauses and strings attached to every single dollar. His grandmother had left a $14 million estate to be divided between her grandchildren, with one very specific condition. The inheritance would only transfer to Merigos Ostebildviren, who could demonstrate, in the estate lawyer's words, a staskable family unit. My husband was the eldest. He stood to inherit the largest share. And his mother had spent the better part of 30 years managing the family's finances as the unofficial executor of everyone's expenses. She had not planned on me. I was not from money. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati with a mother who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry and a father who had made himself scarce before I started kindergarten. I put myself through college on scholarships and part-time waitressing. I got my CPA license at 24, started working at a mid-size firm in Columbus, and met my husband at a client dinner when I was 26. He was funny and warm and looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. I was not accustomed to being looked at that way. I fell in love with him fast and completely, the way you do when you've spent most of your life being quietly invisible. His mother made her feelings clear from the beginning, though she was too controlled to ever say them directly. She would compliment my work ethic in a tone that implied she found it slightly embarrassing. She would ask about my family with the careful curiosity of someone examining an artifact from an unfamiliar culture. At holiday dinners, she would seat me at the far end of the table, near his younger cousins, away from the adults she considered worth talking to. My husband noticed none of it, or he noticed and chose not to see it, which I've come to understand is a choice people make when confrontation is more frightening than the thing that needs confronting. We got married 2 years after we met, small ceremony. His mother wore a cream suit that was almost but not quite white. I noticed. I didn't say anything. For the first year of our marriage, I genuinely tried. I invited her to lunch. I asked for her recipes. I remembered her preferred brand of tea and kept it in our cabinet on the off chance she visited. I sent thank you notes for every gift, every dinner, everything she did that could generously be interpreted as kindness. I was building something, I thought. I was being patient. I was playing the long game that women who marry into complicated families learn to play. Then I got pregnant. I found out on a Tuesday morning in March. I sat on the edge of our bathtub for a long time holding the test, and the feeling that moved through me was not the complicated ambivalence I'd expected. It was pure, uncomplicated joy. I was going to be somebody's mother. I was going to do it differently than it had been done for me. I was going to be there, completely and without reservation, in a way I'd spent my whole childhood wishing someone would be there for me. I told my husband that evening. He cried. I had never seen him cry before. We sat on the kitchen floor eating takeout Thai food and talking about names, and I thought, this is it. This is the thing that will make us a real family. This is the thing that will finally make her accept me, because I am giving her a grandchild, and what could possibly matter more than that? I was so naive it almost takes my breath away to think about it now. His mother insisted on a family dinner to celebrate. Her words, to celebrate. She had the housekeeper prepare my husband's favorite roast, opened a bottle of wine she ostentatiously reminded me I couldn't drink, and sat at the head of the table with that tight smile I'd seen before, but hadn't yet learned to read correctly. Her sister was there, my husband's aunt, a quiet woman who mostly watched things unfold and never interfered, and his cousin who'd flown in from Seattle. It felt like a gathering. It felt almost like warmth. After dinner, while my husband and his cousin were talking on the back patio and his aunt was helping the housekeeper clear the table, my mother-in-law asked me to come see something in her study. She wanted to show me something she'd found, she said. Old family photos. She thought I might like to have copies for the nursery. I followed her down the hallway. I don't know exactly what I expected to find in that study. What I found was her, standing by the window with a document in her hand, telling me in a very calm and pleasant voice that she knew I had trapped her son, that she had spoken with her estate attorney, that the timing of this pregnancy was, in her words, transparently strategic, given that the trust distributions were being reviewed at the end of the fiscal year, that she intended to contest any claim my child might have to the family estate on the grounds that she had serious doubts about paternity. I stood very still. I remember noticing the grandfather clock in the corner. I remember the sound of it ticking. I told her that was insane. I told her the baby was her son's, and she knew that. I told her that accusing me of paternity fraud was not only wrong but the kind of thing that could be disproven with a simple test, and that I would be happy to have one done because I had nothing to hide. She smiled at me. She said, "I know you will, but by then, a lot of damage can be done to a pregnancy under stress. These things happen, terrible accidents." I didn't understand what she meant. I do now. I turned to leave the study. I wanted to find my husband. I wanted to get out of that house and never come back. I made it about 3 steps before she grabbed my arm, and the next few seconds happened so fast that I still can't fully reconstruct them in my memory. There was a door to the side garden she must have unlocked ahead of time, a stone step down that I didn't see coming, and then her hands on my back, and then nothing. I came to on the flagstone pathway outside the study door. I don't know how long I was unconscious. My left wrist was broken, 2 ribs were cracked, I had a concussion that took 6 weeks to fully clear, and I was terrified, a terror so total and physical it overrode the pain, that something had happened to the baby. My husband found me when he came looking. He carried me to the car himself and drove 90 miles an hour to the hospital, and the whole time he was saying my name, saying I'm sorry, saying I've got you. I believed him. I still loved him then. At the hospital is where things got complicated in a way I was prepared for. The ER doctor confirmed that the baby was fine, heartbeat strong, no signs of distress, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. But when the police arrived to take my statement, something shifted. My mother-in-law had called ahead. I learned this later, but I could see the effects of it in real time. She and my husband's cousin arrived at the hospital within 20 minutes of us, before I'd even been moved out of triage, and they went directly to speak with the officer in charge, before anyone came to speak with me. By the time a detective came to my bedside, the story had apparently already been told. That I had been drinking, I was pregnant and hadn't touched a drop, but she said I'd had wine, and my husband hadn't been in the room to see either way. That I had become emotional and erratic during an argument about family finances. That I had stumbled on the garden step in the dark and fallen, and that she had tried to catch me. The detective looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the expression of someone who has already decided what happened and is now going through the courtesy of hearing the other side. I told him the truth. I told him exactly what she had said to me in that study, the threats, the words about damage to a pregnancy under stress, the hands on my back. I told him I had not been drinking. I told him I had not been erratic. I told him my wrist was broken in a way that was inconsistent with a simple trip and fall, and that I thought a medical examiner might find that worth noting. He wrote things down. He told me they would be in touch. Then my mother-in-law came into the room. I want to be very precise about what I say here, because I've had years to process this and I still find it difficult to describe without my voice changing. She came in with my husband beside her. She sat down next to my bed, and she told me in a gentle and almost sorrowful voice that she was worried about my mental state, that the stress of the pregnancy had clearly become too much, that she only wanted what was best for her grandchild, and she hoped I would consider speaking with someone, a professional. Someone who could help me manage my anxiety before it caused me, or the baby, any further harm. My husband stood behind her and said nothing. I looked at him. I looked at him for a long time, and something in me, not a dramatic thing, not a breaking or a shattering, but something very quiet and very permanent, closed. I said I'd like everyone to leave my room now. The detective, to his credit, made them go. And I lay in that hospital bed with my broken wrist and my cracked ribs and my still beating baby, and I started making calculations. I am a CPA. I understand numbers. I understand documentation. I understand the difference between what people say and what the records show. And lying there in that hospital room, I made a decision that felt less like a choice and more like a simple recognition of reality. No one was going to protect me. Not the police, not my husband, not the institution of marriage or the social expectation of family loyalty. I was going to have to build my own protection, from scratch, with nothing but my own hands and my own mind. I started that night. The hospital's stay was 3 days. During those 3 days, I called my college roommate, who is now a family law attorney in Atlanta, and I told her everything. I called the firm where I worked and spoke with a senior partner I trusted. I requested copies of every medical record related to my admission. I wrote down, in as much detail as I could remember, the exact words my mother-in-law had used in the study, the sequence of events, the timeline of arrivals at the hospital. I wrote it all down while it was fresh, and I saved it in 3 different places. My husband came to take me home on the 3rd day. He was tender in the way people are tender when they know they owe you something and can't figure out how to pay it. He carried my bag. He held doors. He kept looking at me sideways with something that might have been guilt or might have been fear, and I couldn't tell which. And I realized I no longer particularly cared. We didn't talk about what had happened in any real way. He said his mother was under a lot of stress. He said the estate situation had created pressure on the whole family. He said he hoped we could find a way through this together. I nodded and looked out the car window and thought about what my attorney had said. Document everything. Say nothing that can be used against you, and wait. I waited. Over the next 4 months, while my ribs healed and my wrist healed, and my daughter grew from a small, frightening flutter to a visible, undeniable presence, I built my case. My roommate connected me with a forensic accountant who had worked on estate fraud cases, and together we spent weeks going through the trust documents my husband had shared with me early in our marriage, back when he still believed we were partners. What we found was not entirely surprising, but was, in legal terms, significant. My mother-in-law had been drawing from a discretionary family account for years in amounts and patterns that didn't align with any legitimate estate management purpose. Small amounts individually, substantial when aggregated, documented with descriptions vague enough to escape casual notice, but not, as it turned out, professional scrutiny. I did not confront my husband with this. I gave it to my attorney. My daughter was born in October. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. She had my husband's nose and my mother's eyes, and she screamed so loudly in that delivery room that the nurse laughed and said she was going to be someone who knew exactly what she wanted. I held her in the blue light of that hospital room, and I thought about my mother-in-law's voice saying, "Damage to a pregnancy under stress," and something hardened in me that I don't think has ever fully softened back. Nor do I want it to. My mother-in-law sent flowers, pale yellow roses in a hospital vase, with a card that said, "Welcome to the world, little one." I put them in the hallway. The legal process moved slowly, the way these things do, and then all at once. The police had in fact forwarded my original statement to a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit. Not because of what happened to me specifically, but because the estate attorney my mother-in-law used had flagged certain irregularities to the state bar, which had in turn flagged them to authorities. My case became part of a larger investigation. My documentation was relevant. My medical records were relevant. The forensic accounting my team had done was very relevant. My mother-in-law was arrested on a Thursday morning, 14 months after she pushed me off that garden step. The charges included elder financial abuse. She had been systematically defrauding her own mother-in-law's estate for over a decade, and assault with serious bodily harm. She was 61 years old, and she had spent her entire adult life managing other people's money and other people's lives, and she had never once considered that anyone would look closely enough to find the seams. I was not in the courtroom when she was sentenced. I didn't need to be. My attorney called me while I was at a playground with my daughter, who was 13 months old, and had recently discovered that sand is fascinating and also edible. I listened to the sentence, 4 years, federal facility, full restitution, and I said thank you, and I hung up and I looked at my daughter sitting in the sandbox with her small serious face, and I thought, good, that's done. My husband and I had separated 8 months earlier. It was not dramatic. There was no single moment of confrontation, no screaming, no thrown objects. There was just the slow and mutual recognition that the person you married had revealed themselves to be someone you didn't know and couldn't trust, and that grief, while real, is not a reason to stay. He moved into an apartment near his office. We share custody of our daughter, which is harder some weeks than others and which requires a level of sustained civility that I find exhausting but manageable. He is not a bad father. He is not a good husband. These things can both be true. I left my firm 18 months after my daughter was born and started my own practice, forensic accounting specifically. Estate fraud, financial abuse, the kind of carefully concealed wrongdoing that hides in the gaps between what families say and what the records actually show. I have 4 employees and more clients than I can reasonably handle, and an office on the 14th floor of a building downtown where I can see the river from my desk on clear days. People sometimes ask me if building this business was my way of getting back at her. If the specialization forensic accounting estate fraud was deliberate, and honestly, yes. And also, no. Yes, in the sense that what happened to me made me understand, viscerally and permanently, how much damage gets done in exactly this space. In the gap between what families claim and what the money says. In the silence that people like my mother-in-law count on, the silence of people who don't want to make trouble, who keep the peace, who decide the cost of confrontation is too high. I wanted to be someone who worked in that gap, not for revenge, but because I know it now in a way I can't unknow. And no, in the sense that spite is genuinely a terrible business plan. It burns fast and leaves nothing behind. I didn't build this to punish anyone. I built it because it was the only foundation I could imagine standing on, something made entirely from my own work, my own mind, my own choices, answerable to no one's conditions, subject to no one's trust documents. Some mornings my daughter wakes up early and I bring her into the office when I have a full day ahead of me, and she sits on the floor near my desk with her blocks and her small arguments with gravity, and I watch her figure things out, and I think about who taught me what. I think about my mother, who worked double shifts and never once suggested to me that my circumstances defined my ceiling. I think about my mother-in-law, who taught me without meaning to that the most dangerous people in your life are often the ones with the most to lose. And I think about that night in the study, the grandfather clock ticking, her voice so calm and pleasant and absolute. I am grateful for what I know now. I would not have chosen the way I learned it, but I am grateful. If you are somewhere right now where someone is counting on your silence, counting on your fear of conflict, your desire to keep the peace, your love for someone who has made themselves into a shield for someone who means you harm, I want you to hear this. The documentation that saves you does not have to be dramatic. It does not have to be a hidden camera or a recorded confession. It can be a note, time-stamped, with the exact words they used. It can be a medical record. It can be a pattern of numbers that doesn't add up. Start there. Start small. Start now. Because the gap between what people say and what the records show, that is where the truth lives, and the truth, in my experience, is almost always is enough. My daughter just handed me a red block. She wants me to add it to the tower. I'm going to go do that now.